Today we're going to transition into the last part of this unit, which is, if you haven't seen from College Board, the last unit that they're going to cover for the test this year. So once we get through World War II, we're actually at the end of the content they're going to test on, which is really odd, but it is what it is because we don't know when we're coming back. So we're going to look at the Great Depression, how the Roaring Twenties came to a roaring end. So, as we discussed in a previous lesson, the 1920s have been a period of really good economic times for most people. There were new businesses, new factories opening up. We talked about the fact that there were consumer goods like washing machines, vacuum cleaners, stuff like that. People had credit for the first time. They wanted to buy those things, so they were getting credit, what would basically be a credit card or a credit account. So they're spending money they don't actually have, but that is creating an economic boom in the 1920s. That's all going to come crashing to an end with the era that we call the Great Depression, which some of this is going to be really what's going on right now is similar to what they faced at the beginning of the Great Depression, though we have systems in place now to prevent what happened in the Great Depression from happening now. So one of the things that drove it is the stock market. And what you're seeing here is like the average of the stock market. So if you're looking in the early 1920s, right after World War I ended, there was a recession. The recession dealt with the fact that the wartime industries were now closing down and production hadn't ramped up on those consumer goods. But you can see as they transition, the average of the stock market starts going up. And by the mid-1920s, the stock market just explodes. People are believing in what's happening. They're believing in this growth of industry, and they think that this line is just always going to go up. So invest now, and they were really taken by what was happening. And then, as you notice, in 1929, that's going to lead to the stock market crash, which you should remember from middle school. So let's look at the causes of the Depression. We're going to start with the stock market, which is really not one of the main causes, but it's often one that is discussed. So if you're not aware, the public can invest money in companies. You can purchase stocks in any company that is publicly traded. Apple is a good example, and I'll open up a tab here in a second and pull that up and show you what that looks like. In the 1920s, investors only had to pay for a fraction of what that stock's value was. So the idea of this is known as buying on margin. So what you could do is, I'm going to buy a stock, Apple stock. It's going to be, let's just take a look. So right now, if I'm going to buy Apple stock, it is $213.58 as of right now for that stock. If I were to buy this today, I would have to pay that for the entire stock, and it just went down some more at $213.53. So in the 1920s, what they were doing is saying, you'll pay 10% of this. So I'm going to pay $21 roughly to buy that stock. I'll pay the other 90% back later. Now, that's a loan. And so what would happen is, as this number went up and up and up and up and up, I can pay my loans back, and then I can make money that way. So that's Apple. Okay. So that's called buying on margin. That is illegal now. So when you buy that stock, you have a portion of that company. So the second thing they were doing on the stock market in the 20s was what's called stock speculation. People were buying and selling stocks very quickly to make money, which causes these stocks to raise in value because it is being bought and sold so much. So what was happening is, and this is a real example, GE stock was really worth about $130 a share, but was selling for $396 a share. Now what this means is, if the company, and this is a very simple explanation, if the company was to pay out everything it had and close down, roughly they could pay out about $130 per share in the company. Well, what happens if they're selling for $396 and they shut down? You're going to lose a ton of money there. So what happens is on Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, the stock exchange dropped $14 billion in their money, $14 billion in value in one day. And what happened is people freaked out. they started doing what's called panic selling. And what that means is, if I know, here we'll go back to Apple here. So the stock market, you guys should have been following, is in trouble right now. Starting in February, stocks started to have a problem because of the coronavirus. So if I knew that I have a stock for $327, okay, and I know this coronavirus thing is coming, I'm going to sell right there, because now, if I bought that for $327, I'm only getting $213 back on it. I can lose a ton of money over a very short period of time, and typically you have to buy stocks in the hundreds. So you're talking about an extreme amount of money. You can look at a different stock, Ford. We'll go over 6 months. You notice Ford stock, not as expensive as Apple, but selling for about $8.86 a share. Now it's $4.08. That's not good. And you can see it changing in real time as people are buying and selling. But I've lost half the total value. So if I put $20,000 into this, expecting that maybe I'm going to make some money on it, now I've lost half the value. I just lost $10,000 for nothing. Now let's say I didn't have that $20,000. That was loans. Not only do I not have that money, I don't have any money to pay my loan back, which means the banks don't have any money. Now, banks use that money that you put in there. When you put money in the bank, like in a savings account, they use that money for those loans. If they can't get those loans back, there's a real problem, because now where's your money at? It's gone. So here you see people doing a run on a bank. They want to go get all their money out before the money runs out. There isn't just a box with your name on it in the bank. They're using that for home loans and car loans and stuff like that. When I was in high school, I used to think that it was just my money was sitting there somehow. It's not that way. I have money in the bank right now, and yes, I can go get it, but there's not enough money in that bank to pay everybody out because they've loaned that money to other people. So when they panic sell, they lose all that value in the stock market. And then what happens is, even though as small as you notice here, a small minority of people, just tiny minority of people trade on the stock market. But when they lose that money and the banks lose their money and then people freak out and go remove whatever money is in the banks actually have to shut down because they don't have anything. So what that meant for the working class people is any money they had in the bank was gone, lost. People went down to the bank and said, let me get my money out. And the bank said, we don't have any money. This is awful. I mean, I don't know, how else to show you. There's a great scene in one of my favorite movies, and we'll see if we can pull it up here. It's from It's a Wonderful Life. It's the bank run. And I want to show you what's happening here, because this is from right after this time period. And I want to show you what a bank run would look like. Now, this is not for the Great Depression, but the same idea.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Hey, lady, you got any money in the bank? You better hurry.
George, let's not stop. Let's go.
A minute there. Uh-oh.
Please, let's not stop,
I'll
George.
be back in a minute, man.
So George here owns a small savings
Well,
and loan
hello,
company.
everybody. Miss Thompson, how are you? Ollie, what's the matter here? Can't you get in? What is this, Uncle Billy? A holiday? George. Come on in, everybody. That's right. Let's come on in. Come on, Billy.
This is his
Why
bank.
don't you all sit down? Here, there are a lot of seats over there. Make yourself at home.
George, can I see you a minute?
Why did you call me?
I just did, but they said you left. This is a pickle, George. This is a pickle.
All right, now what happened? How did it start?
Well, how does a thing like this ever start? All I know is the bank called our loan.
When?
About an hour ago, I handed over all our cash.
All of it?
Every cent of it, and still was less than we owed.
Holy mackerel.
And then I got scared, George, and closed the doors.
The whole town's gone crazy.
Yeah, hello? George, it's Potter.
Hello?
George, there is a rumor around town that you've closed your doors. Is that true? Oh, well, I'm very glad to hear that. George, are you all right? Do you need any police?
Police? What for?
Well, mobs get pretty ugly sometimes, you know. George, I am going all out to help in this crisis. I have just guaranteed the bank sufficient funds to meet their needs. They will close up for a week and then reopen.
Just took over the bank.
I may lose a fortune, but I am willing to
So I'm going to
guarantee
fast forward
your
here to
people
get to what the people
$2
are.
before.
Just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here.
Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
The 60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares.
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you got. 50 cents? Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this.
Okay, Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Better to get half than nothing.
Randall, wait. Now, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets a hold of this building and loan, there'll never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank, he's got the bus line, he got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple. Because we're cutting in on his business, that's why. And because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent he decides. Joe, you had one of those Potter houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he... Well, you understand each other. Here's $2,000. This will tide us over to the bank reopens. All right, Tom, how much do you need?
$242.
No, Tom, just enough to tide you over until the bank reopens.
I'll take $242.
There you are.
That'll close my account.
Your account's still here. That's a loan. Okay. All right, Ed.
Well, I got $300 here, George.
All right, now, Ed, what'll it take until the bank opens? What do you need?
Well, I suppose $20.
$20. Now you're talking. Thanks, Ed. That's fine. All right, now, Miss Thompson, how much do you want?
But it's your own money.
Now, these people were being much calmer than I think any of you would be. If you had $20,000 sitting in the bank, and there was a chance that it was going to be gone forever, and you know this guy has money, you would be going nuts. I know I would. If you told, oh, your money's just gone, I would freak out. So that's what happened to a lot of people. They freaked out. It's happening to people right now with the coronavirus. People I know have gone and withdrawn all their money from the bank because they're worried about this happening again. Now, we have some things in place now that to ensure that this never happens again. However, there are people that still believe that. So a lot of people you notice here were out of jobs because now they can't. If you take all my money out of the bank and I lose it, I'm done. I can't make my house payment. I can't make my payment for my kids' colleges. I can't do any of that. I can't buy food. I'm in trouble. So a lot of these people, one day they were making a lot of money. The next day they're wearing signs asking for anything. I mean, just any kind of food. There were famous photographer named Dorothea Lange. She went around and took pictures. This is probably the most famous picture. You've probably seen this one before, of the suffering that this caused in the Depression. Unemployment ran up to about 30%. Over that in some places. Some places unemployment could get up to 60, 70%. So the Great Depression, this stock market crash, kind of leads to this. You see this guy's trying to sell his car for anything, $100 to buy that car. Some other factors that caused this crash. The Roaring Twenties were based only on a few different industries. There wasn't a whole lot of diversity in the economy, which caused a problem because if one or two of those things went down, they all go down. The whole economy collapses. Now we have a much more diverse economy. We have service industries and different things that are happening. There was unequal distribution of wealth. The booming 20s was not booming for everyone. Farmers, for instance, were already in a depression during the 20s. African Americans and other minorities wasn't very booming for most of them. And then there were the poor whites that also weren't feeling the effects of that boom. They also had high protective tariffs that hurt our economy and hurt our market. It made things expensive to come in, and it made things harder to buy. Okay, so we got to look very quickly at President Hoover's response. His response was what responses had always been, which was, look, the government's not going to do anything. Laissez-faire. Hands off. Americans should help themselves. You go to your churches, go to your community boards, your food banks, stuff like that. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It had always worked for America. How is this any different? So he didn't want them to have a role. So he did do some things. He organized some donations from private individuals. He called rich friends and rich people, and they donated to things you might have heard of, like the Red Cross, the Salvation Army. The YMCA was actually like hosting men at that point. They could actually go live there. And Community Chest was something. You probably recognize that from Monopoly, which is another thing like the Red Cross. They did put a moratorium on the war debts. They thought that would help. It doesn't. They also put up a new tariff called the Smoot-Hawley tariff. They hoped that would make people buy American goods because you're going to tax foreign goods at a higher rate. Well, that's really stupid during a depression to raise a tariff because now you're raising the prices on all goods. People are going to buy less. His final thing that Hoover tried to do was some public works. They built what they called the Boulder Dam, or which would be renamed later the Hoover Dam after him since he did it. If you could put a bunch of people to work on this, they would then have money in their pockets and could go buy things again. So the problem with this is it didn't put enough people to work. I think it was about 22,000 people. It wasn't enough money to get the economy going. It is a really crazy feat of engineering, but it doesn't do enough. If you've seen the Transformer movies, you've probably seen the Hoover Dam, built in a canyon, and it blocks up and makes a huge reservoir behind it. So, okay. He did make what is called the RFC, which was Reconstruction Financing. It loaned money to banks, railroads, insurance companies, and other businesses, but not to American people. They believed that giving money to the American people would be a bad thing. It was too little, too late, as I mentioned there. So here's Hoover. His response, it's easy to remember this, sucked like a Hoover vacuum cleaner. It sucked. Sorry, my humor's bad, but whatever. So how did Americans react? They were really frustrated by him. They started naming things that were indicative of the Depression for him, such as the shanty towns are called Hoovervilles. Food scraps out of a dumpster were called Hoover meals. It's like the opposite of a Happy Meal. Hoover rides were hitchhiking. If you ever seen somebody with like a flag hanging, or a pocket hanging out, that symbolizes that you broke, they start calling those Hoover flags. So here's a Hooverville. These are just houses made out of whatever you could buy or find, really. They're little shacks. I mean, this is the United States, not some third world country. You see a little kid there living in a Hooverville. A lot of communities that just had nothing. People started migrating around the country. They started wandering. They would hear rumors of jobs in California, and people go out to California. We'll talk about that later. People lined up at, if you notice up here, free cup of coffee and donuts for the unemployed. Bread lines became a thing. Soup lines became a thing. People really, really started, getting desperate for food. And you notice here's the Great Depression here, the unemployment rate, and it is even higher in some estimations, but 1 in 4 people are unemployed. And what that means is that's just the people with no jobs. A lot of people went on way reduced hours. Some of you might be suffering from that now. You might still have your job, but you're only working half the hours that you used to, or less. And that's where we're going to stop today, is just talking about that early reaction. So Hoover doesn't do much. The economy crashes really rapidly, and Hoover's response is pretty lame. On the next video, we are going to talk about the Bonus Army. We're going to talk about the election of 1932, and then we're going to do a brief introduction to the New Deal, and I'll have an assignment for you to do on that. So thanks for tuning in today. And again, remember to post a question or a comment on